Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Catherine Hecht, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alexander Valley Film Society, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here into my home studio in Cloverdale, California, to focus on with the Alexander Valley Film Society, where we get to chat with filmmakers, storytellers, tastemakers, and changemakers. And today is no exception. We're thrilled to bring into the studio Erika Cohn, the director of Belly and the Beast. A most impressive resume and experience for this award-winning director. So before we get to meet her, heads up that we are live across all of our social media channels. You can find us on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge that yesterday was a historic day, something that culminates a very long period of stress and concern for many of us, and now represents an opportunity for some deep work to continue happening, both in this country, obviously, but also here at the Film Society. We've made a deep commitment to facing our own implicit bias by getting busy with a consultant doing work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, what those things mean to our organization, and the kind of changes that we want to make going forward. We continue to have the tough discussions using film as our launching pad and our stage, so to speak. So fortunate that in this time of COVID, film and screens have remained a medium that we can use for this exact kind of work. And today's film, Belly of the Beast, is no exception. If you haven't seen it yet, you have until Thursday at midnight to watch it through the Alexander Valley Film Society. And we'll also put up a link later when we meet Erika, where you can watch it after that if for some reason you miss it. So without further ado, let's get busy and welcome in Erika Cohn, director of Belly and the Beast. Erika, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Catherine.
Thank you so much for being here, and happy election weekend. Happy film in the can weekend, or can experience and press experience. Tell us how you're doing, just in general.
This weekend is the first time that I think I've had that real sigh of relief, and it's also an incredible weekend to kind of regroup, as you mentioned, and get ready to dig in and dive into the work that is so necessary. And Belly of the Beast, I feel, is a part of that kind of call to action.
Absolutely. Did you have any idea when making and wrapping this film that you would be on the precipice here of such a historic turn in the tide, hopefully, but also such a timely story in terms of our national conversations?
Well, I think this film has always been timely and always been relevant. And the legacy of forced sterilization in the United States is so deeply rooted in white supremacy. And that is something that will forever be relevant as we try to, in this moment, attack, combat, address the legacy of white supremacy in this country. And I had no idea that the film would be released in COVID. I had no idea that the film would be released amid the uprisings, the Black Lives Matter uprisings. I had no idea that it would be released. Our trailer was put out the Friday before the news about the sterilizations in ICE detention centers in Georgia came out. And so in this moment, we are really seeing how eugenics is alive and well, and we are witnessing systemic racism and population control through so many different facets, through policing, through imprisonment, through the immigration detention system, through lack of access to healthcare. So I feel like Belly of the Beast is really a part of the larger conversation that highlights these injustices and then also calls for immediate accountability and redress.
So let's back up a second. Let's back up to the origin story for you in terms of approaching this subject matter. How did this come to your attention? How did it grab your spark, so to speak?
Well, about a decade ago was when it all first began. And I was introduced to attorney Cynthia Chandler, one of the main protagonists in the film, and was really inspired by her compassionate release work. She was the first attorney in California to get someone out of California's prisons under compassionate release. And she had co-founded an organization called Justice Now, which was one of the only, if not the only organization in the US that had board members currently incarcerated, informing strategy and informing policy from the inside out. And they had a campaign called the Let Our Families Have a Future campaign, which exposed the multiple ways that prisons destroy the basic and fundamental human right to family. One of the most heinous, of course, being the illegal sterilizations, which primarily were targeting women of color. And to me, as a Jewish woman who grew up in Salt Lake City, this really, was a part of a conversation. The phrase "never again" really stuck out to me. This was eugenics. What I was hearing was eugenics. And when I learned about this different kind of genocide that was happening through imprisonment, that was happening through forced sterilizations behind bars, I knew that I wanted to get involved. At that moment, I didn't know fully to what degree or how the film would be developing, but Cynthia invited me into the organization as a volunteer, and I became a volunteer legal advocate providing direct service needs for over 150 people inside California's women's prisons. And from there began collaborating on a project that would ultimately become Belly of the Beast. And in the initial stages of this film, it was really a project that was going to chronicle the incredible, courageous human rights documentation work that was happening inside prison. And then the way that people who were incarcerated who experienced these abuses funneled that information out, because the prison didn't want people in the free world or in the non-incarcerated world to know that these abuses were happening, and how the unlikely alliances between communities in prison and communities outside of prison were kind of working together to address these human rights abuses. And then that kind of all changed when I officially had a chance to meet our other protagonist, Kelly Dillon, who is a sterilization survivor. At the time I met her, she was working in Los Angeles as a community interventionist, doing gun violence prevention and domestic violence prevention work. And in this moment, she had really put the sterilization issue behind her. She had already gone to trial. She had uncovered the abuses inside prison in tandem with Cynthia Chandler, had really put this horrific event behind her. And so we began collaborating on a variety of projects, including Belly of the Beast. And Belly of the Beast, she was an advisor kind of behind the scenes. She didn't want to be involved in actively telling her story, but was an incredible advisor kind of through the initial conceptual ideas of this film. And then that all changed. There's so many moments where it all changed.
Yeah.
It all changed in 2013 when the Center for Investigative Reporting launched their very controversial investigation into the tubal ligations that were happening during labor and delivery between 2006 and 2010. And there was this tremendous momentum. For the first time, legislators, the media were listening to what was going on. And Kelly got called back, sucked back into this. The movement needed her. They needed her testimony. They needed her to be a voice for so many people who wouldn't be able to show up in person to give their testimonies. So that was the moment that Kelly and I both decided that the camera would turn towards her, start filming her through the process of sharing her testimony. And then as the film kind of continued on, it became more and more centered around her story and her relationship with Cynthia Chandler. And as you discover in the film, really, if it wasn't for Kelly to begin with, none of this would have even happened.
Right.
And her initial discovery with Cynthia Chandler about what happened to her really catalyzed a series of additional discoveries that this was happening to not only her, but hundreds of other women of color.
You know, Erika, there are a couple of things that you touched on there that I just want to I want to highlight a little further. Something that I think that the film does an exceptional job capturing is the almost haphazard way that this whole movement gets started. But then secondarily, I feel like Kelly really finds her words to be able to articulate just how unjust the process is. If nothing else, asking her to relive that trauma over and over and over again as a way of defending herself. And that's something that we know about with domestic abuse survivors, but to hear it told in the context of this compounded trauma, it's really moving. Can you tell us how she is doing today?
Kelly would describe herself as being very blessed. She's someone who is incredibly career-driven, an incredible family member, an incredible friend, and is working to address domestic violence, gang intervention from multiple different avenues. She's the executive director of an organization called Back to the Basics in Los Angeles, which is an incredible organization that we all should be supporting and rallying behind. You know, the one thing though was that Kelly has never received her happy ending. And, you know, she talks about it in the film, what would a happy ending look like? And that would be reparations. That would be justice for the survivors. And, you know, when we talk about human rights abuses and we talk about what needs to happen so that we prevent them from continuing to happen, I mean, the first step is acknowledgement. There has been acknowledgement. There have been safeguards put in place in some locations. In California, a bill was passed rendering sterilization for the purpose of birth control illegal. It was already illegal according to state, federal, and international law. So this was really like a sunshine statute to highlight the already present illegality of these procedures. But then the next step is atonement, accountability. And for Kelly, and for so many other survivors, they have not yet received an apology. And there needs to be justice in the form of reparations. No amount of money will ever make right the harm that was done to the survivors, but it is how we acknowledge that harm was committed in our society. And then 3, survivors to this day still don't know that they were actually sterilized. There has to be a process of notifying them and then holding the state actors, holding the institutions who allowed this to happen accountable. We actually have a petition on our website right now, bellyofthebeastfilm.com, where you can sign the petition to support sterilization survivors, both historic sterilization survivors as well as contemporary survivors. And I really believe that that will not only continue to make amends for our eugenics history, which you learn about in the film, but also to ensure accountability so that modern instances of forced sterilization and other modern eugenics practices, like what happened a few years ago in California's women's prisons, what has happened in the ICE detention facility in Georgia, don't continue to happen.
I want to ask you one more question about your discovery process in the film, because I felt like the interview you had with one of the women who served as a healthcare professional and her voice was masked to disguise her identity, a very deliberate choice on your part to leave in her revelation that she wasn't entirely sure it was a bad idea to do this. I think we can tell from it appears that the woman is white, and that she was in a position of power with over inmates or women who were incarcerated. Can we dig into that a little bit and unpack that as to why you left that in the film, what you think about that? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That interview was really interesting for me because I wanted the audience to go through the same discovery process that I went through. in conducting the interview. And you don't actually know when you first meet her how she feels. And I don't want to give too much away, but you know, layers and layers of the onion are peeled back throughout the course of the film. And it's not just in that particular interview, but you see it from the general public in response to the bill being passed, Center for Investigative Reporting, releasing their findings that eugenics is so deeply entrenched. Systemic racism is so deeply entrenched in every aspect of society, in our institutions, in our daily life. And it was important to although we focus on a couple of particular doctors, that we go beyond just one individual actor, one bad apple, and illustrate how pervasive this ideology is, how pervasive modern day eugenics really is.
Got it. Yeah, it's I too want to just dig into it, but I also don't want to, like you said, I don't want to give too much away. I really want people to be drawn into the film and have that discovery for themselves. Here we have a quick shout out to Lex at the Roxy in San Francisco for introducing us. Lex has been a great ally of ours and just a terrific friend to me. And so I'm so glad that we did get to connect this way. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about your process as a filmmaker with this work. Was there a moment or moments that you look back at that you find particularly surprising in the process?
I think almost every week was a surprise in this film, to be honest. I will say that this was definitely the hardest film that I have ever made. And, you know, there are so many reasons for that. And one of, you know, this film had so many layers of complexity, and we had so many test screenings to see what was resonating, and something would happen and the story would shift. And the end of 2018, we thought we were near finished. We thought we were close to picture lock. The film was wrapped, was ready to be released. And then in the fact-checking process of the details of Kelly's case, I had spoken to several of her attorneys, former attorneys who had moved on. The law firm that had represented her had merged into another law firm. And I was trying to track down the actual files from the case. And no one seemed to know where they could be. Finally, I was put in touch with an attorney who had made the merge, who had actually worked on Kelly's case at the tail end of it. And he had no idea where these files could be. So finally, we were able to track down the files in a random storage unit outside of San Francisco. And in those files was a DVD of Kelly's deposition.
Oh my gosh.
And that the deposition footage of Kelly when she is so young, when she is in prison, talking about everything that she has gone through in the moment, was a total game changer for the film. And we ended up recutting the film around it. And it serves both as our introduction to imprisonment. It serves as kind of the spine of the actual trial scene. And then as a consistent reminder of both Kelly's past and present as she negotiates her own dreams, her own career aspirations, as well as being kind of sucked back in and feeling obligated to represent and to participate in the larger cause. Wow.
I can't imagine if you hadn't found that.
It was a real game changer for the film. And I also have to say that the two nurses who are interviewed in the film happened at the very last minute. And I had spent a long time with our team trying to find people who had worked in the prison who would be willing to talk about what had happened. And there was tremendous fear of retaliation, even if they hadn't worked or they had stopped working there, that they had retired. And I think when we talk about retaliation, it's important to consider the entire retaliatory environment that we're talking about, both from the perspective of those who are incarcerated as well as those who are working there. And you saw that actually in the case of the sterilizations in the ICE detention center in Georgia, Don Wooten, the whistleblower, who really faced tremendous retaliation for questioning that these procedures, these mass hysterectomies were happening, and then later continued to face retaliation after she came out with what happened publicly.
Wow. Just thank you for sticking with the story. I mean, I know that 10 years is a long haul, but yeah, it's just so necessary. This is exactly how people are going to discover this, like you did, and get involved to making changes. So now the film is out in the public. It's been released. I'm seeing it play all over the country, which is so exciting. Red, blue states, everywhere. I'm seeing it everywhere. So that's really incredible. What has the response been for you so far?
I think it's been really incredible. People are wondering, what can we do in this moment? What kind of conversations do we need to have in this moment? People were really shocked when the news about the sterilizations in the ICE detention center in Georgia came out. And I think that is really a part of a broader issue, that we don't talk about our eugenics history. As you find out in the film, Nazi Germany actually came to the US to learn from our eugenics policies in California. Mm-hmm. So that's not discussed. I didn't know about that until I started making this film. And so when we look at these incidents as isolated events, we're actually ignoring a legacy that is so important to contextualize what's going on. And I think that this has been a real wake-up call. The film and what's been going on in the news and media has been a real wake-up call for people to understand that this is not actually so shocking when you contextualize with historical precedents. And we're really kind of at the precipice of creating some lasting change. We had some great news this weekend, and I really believe that while a spotlight is on systemic racism, is on imprisonment as another form of genocide itself, another form of eugenics today, that we can really start diving in and doing some deep work.
And speaking of contextualizing, have you read or are you familiar with Isabel Wilkerson's Caste?
I have not read it.
Okay. A couple of us at the Film Society are making our way through that now. And I'm reading it on my Kindle, so I can only tell you I'm 10% of the way through. I don't know what page, but she talks a lot about confronting our history, and I'm sure she's not the first person to say it, and I'm certainly not an expert, but in terms of actually contextualizing the history, our shared history, if we are not able to talk about it, it simply will not change. It will. We have to air and unearth our shared history in terms of systemic racism specifically. And she also talked about the dehumanization process in, some of those early generations of slaveholding, and how it was as, not that one would qualify one more than the other, but it was dehumanizing as well for slaveholders and their ancestors to minimize the human experience, of minimize and torture fellow humans in that time. And so that there is great trauma that's been in continuum in this country, and that if we don't address it, it's just not going to change. It's not going to get better. And I think, to your point, having the spotlight on this moment, I'm really hoping that it's not just about healing our country, but it's about digging in and having the conversations we haven't been capable of having so far. So, so again, just good for you for this work. And so, so the film is out, and you're starting to get some responses. Do you have a dream for the film in terms of its process and its life out in the world?
Well, Well, I also just have to make another book recommendation. Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body is one of the most essential reads, and it's been out for a long time, but I can't say enough about Dorothy Roberts' work, and she's an advisor on the film and someone who was interviewed in the film. In terms of dreams, hopes and dreams for the film, right now we're kind of in the midst of our theatrical. We will be on Independent Lens, PBS's Independent Lens, on November 23rd, and really excited to be able to reach millions of viewers across the United States with that. You know,
excuse me.
I think one of the most important calls to action that we have is really surrounding reparations for California's forced sterilization survivors, which again is on our website, bellyofthebeastfilm.com. California would not be the first. North Carolina and Virginia were the first two states to pass reparations for those who were sterilized in the historical eugenics program. Across the United States, as you know, over 30 states passed compulsory sterilization laws that were, really in existence until the 70s, in some states up into the 80s. So that reparations component is so key, because I think what's also important to look at in regards to California as a test case, California was the most heinous offender of the entire sterilization program, sterilizing over 20,000 people between 1909 and 1979. In 2003, Governor Gray Davis actually apologized for California's eugenic history. But at the same time, the sterilizations were going on in prison. In 2003, they were going on. They continued up until 2013, 2014. So unless there's that atonement accountability component, these abuses will continue to happen. So I think that's really where we hope the film will go and bring attention to.
Erika, in your life and experience and work as a filmmaker, was there a moment where you knew you wanted to focus on stories like this, or where you felt drawn to social justice issues in particular?
I got involved in documentary filmmaking very young. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the Sundance Institute, Sundance Film Festival, as many people know, is located. And I fell in love with cinema so young. I was very fortunate to have a mom who really loved cinema also. When I started going to the film festival, 7, 8, 9 years old, and got so excited to experience these amazing works of art in these, being so little, you kind of look up at a screen and you just feel transported just into these other worlds. And I remember watching my mom actually watch film, and her jaw just like dropped. The way that she watches films was so engaging. Still to this day, she does. She kind of like becomes all consumed. So I kind of watched my mom. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could get like my mom to do that, if I could create something. So I started actually kind of messing around with film very young. And then when I was 15, the Sundance Institute partnered with a local media organization to empower youth to tell their stories through documentary filmmaking. And growing up as someone who was non-Mormon in a place where really faith defines who you are, your identity, I decided to turn the camera on my family, coming from an interfaith family actually, and talk to them about, why they were perhaps disappointed with my parents' marriage, and also in this kind of teenage angsty socio-cultural religious alienation time, was able to really confront my identity crisis. And that film reached a lot of other, young people across the country. And that was kind of the moment when I realized, wow, I can actually create change, and I can provide a platform for not only my story to be told, but for hundreds of other stories to be told. And this is, an incredible privilege to be able to tell stories. And it's an incredible privilege to be able to use film to tell stories. And so I feel like it's kind of a responsibility and somewhat of a calling.
I love it. I love it. So I'm mindful of our time, but I do want to check in about what's going on now, next projects. Two questions. What's coming up next for you, or what are you working on? And what are you doing in this time to keep creative and keep those juices flowing?
I can't yet talk about the next project, but hopefully
that means it's juicy.
You'll hear more next year in 2021. This has definitely been, I think, a challenging time for all creative people. And I'm so fortunate to be able to be releasing Belly of the Beast in such a timely moment. And I think I've been very consumed with being able to pivot towards this time where self-distribution is so essential. We actually decided to move up our broadcast on PBS, which was scheduled for next spring, to November 23rd this year, to ensure that the film was accessible during this moment. And instead of waiting for a distributor for the film, which a lot of distributors have decided not to release films theatrically, we decided to do our own theatrical release and contact theaters ourselves and create a kind of a groundswell movement in partnership with racial justice, prison abolition, and reproductive justice organizations, with each theater in different cities across the United States, so that we could ensure that the film was accessible and we would ensure that the film had impact. So I think if we can take a step back and kind of reimagine and redefine what success looks like during this time, it's very empowering. I think it's very inspiring, and I encourage other creators to kind of step out of the box that we often find ourselves in and think about alternative ways of getting our work out.
Oh, I love it. Erika, this has just been such a treat. I thank you so much for the work on the film and for sticking with it and having a vision to share. Here's the website once more for those of you. If you go to bellyofthebeastfilm.com/watch, you will also see where the screenings are to be held, or virtually in person, for the next, how far out have you scheduled?
We will be screening actually through the broadcast. So you'll find theaters and you can actually choose, which organization you'd like to support as well. And we're so grateful to be partnering with you as well. This is so exciting.
Well, thank you. It's a thrill. And I really look forward to being able to meet you in person at some point and have you up here to share our bounty and wealth of geography. But until then, do you have any parting thoughts for any young people who might be watching?
Really use this moment to find alternative ways of expressing yourself through art. I mean, there's nothing in this moment where we're seeing so many cell phone videos come out. I actually have a short film coming out that was shot entirely on a cell phone. Hopefully will be released next year. And there's, in this moment, I think a lot of the production value questions have kind of subsided. So create if you're inspired to create, and then find alternative ways of getting your work seen.
Amazing. Well, Erika, thank you again for your time today. Such a treat to have you here. All right. Well, Erika, we'll say goodbye to you, and for the rest of you watching, thank you again for joining us today. And if you are not up to speed, Belly of the Beast is playing through Thursday at midnight. And we have also opened the Youth Documentary Academy Victory Tour, a 5-short series of some of the best documentaries made with Tom Shepard's kiddos in the Youth Documentary Academy out there in Colorado. And we will be talking with Tom and some of those student filmmakers next Sunday at 2 p.m. So until then, breathe deep, stay safe, stay sane, and stay connected, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.